We often categorize gardening as an idle hobby reserved for retirement. But clinical data reclassifies it as a highly effective, multi-component therapeutic intervention. Why does your central nervous system react to pulling weeds the very same way it responds to a complex medical protocol? Right now, human biology is experiencing a physiological deficit simply from a severe lack of physical contact with nature. How can a small community garden reverse this psychological decline in just 30 days? If you are curious about the hidden biological mechanisms silently controlling your body, hit that subscribe button right now. We are going to dive deep into the fascinating medical truth about what dirt actually does to your brain and your immune system. Picture a heart rate monitor attached to someone sitting in a comfortable, climate-controlled high-rise apartment. The room is quiet, the temperature is perfect, and the physical threat level is essentially zero. You might look at this environment and assume it represents complete safety. We often think that removing all physical challenges creates an ideal state for human health. This seems incredibly logical, but the biological reality is far more complex. If you look closely at the physiological data generated by the nervous system in that quiet room, you will notice something deeply fascinating. The body is subtly operating in a state of low-grade alert. Cortisol is slowly trickling into the bloodstream. The sympathetic nervous system is humming relentlessly in the background. Why does the complete physical safety of modern urban comfort often correlate with rising rates of lifestyle diseases like diabetes and cardiovascular fatigue? This is a profound biological paradox. The answer lies in how your brain computes environmental data. Human biology is a sophisticated prediction machine. It evolved over millions of years to crave specific sensory inputs from the natural world to regulate its internal rhythms. It expects to feel the uneven, yielding terrain of soil underfoot. It expects to see the beautiful fractal patterns of tree branches against the sky. It listens for the changing acoustic signatures of wind and rustling leaves. When you remove these elements, the predictive system of your brain encounters a fundamental puzzle. It is completely starved of the baseline data it relies on to establish a feeling of physiological safety. Scientists refer to this subtle biological disconnect as the extinction of experience. What happens to your systemic homeostasis when the environment that originally shaped your biology is entirely missing? The body does not just feel psychologically bored, it enters a state of chronic, mild inflammation. The autonomic nervous system heavily requires continuous, high-resolution data from the natural world to confirm that your surroundings are truly safe. Without the gentle acoustic signature of wind or the specific visual wavelength of green foliage, the brain defaults to a state of quiet vigilance. The amygdala, a small almond-shaped region deep in your brain that processes safety and fear, remains slightly elevated. The hypothalamus perceives this sensory void as a persistent, low-level puzzle. It sends a continuous chemical signal to the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland then gently commands the adrenal glands to release cortisol. This entire pathway is known as the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. In a sterile indoor environment, it runs on an endless, exhausting cycle. The system slowly accumulates stress hormones that have nowhere to go. There is no physical predator to run from, only a quiet apartment and a glowing computer screen. The biological machinery prepares for significant physical output, but that output never arrives. Lifestyle diseases often emerge because our biological system is constantly trying to regulate itself in a modern habitat that simply lacks the sensory nutrients required for balance. The baseline rhythm desperately needs a mechanical reset. Now, imagine a split screen in your mind. On the left side, you see a handful of complex pharmaceutical pills designed to artificially lower blood pressure, modulate serotonin, and manage everyday anxiety. On the right side, you see a handful of damp, dark soil. Shift your focus entirely to the soil. You step outside, push your bare hands into the dirt, and begin to turn over a small patch of earth. It looks like a primitive, almost entirely physical action. But why does this highly repetitive, seemingly mundane task trigger an immediate, measurable drop in neurological anxiety? We explore this contrast to highlight unique biological pathways, not to discourage traditional medicine. We often assume that only engineered chemicals can quickly alter our brain state. This seems logical, but the clinical data suggests something remarkably beautiful. Gardening is not simply the act of looking at plants while standing outdoors. It is what clinical researchers routinely define as a multi-component intervention protocol. It is an active, simultaneous combination of mechanical movement, intense visual attention, and continuous tactile feedback. When you swallow a standard pill to lower your heart rate, you are typically using a single target chemical intervention. The molecule binds to one specific receptor type. When you garden, you are deploying a systemic biological upgrade that targets multiple neural pathways at the very same time. How does manipulating dirt act as preventive healthcare? It delivers a concentrated, regular dose of natural stimuli directly into your central nervous system. This is profound sensory integration in action. This intervention bypasses your conscious, worrying mind entirely. Every time your fingers brush against a complex root system, millions of microscopic mechanoreceptors in your skin fire simultaneously. Pacinian corpuscles instantly detect the firm pressure of the earth. Meissner corpuscles map out the fine texture of the soil particles. Merkel discs sense the sustained weight of the damp earth resting against your palms. They send a high-resolution cascade of stabilizing spatial data up your spinal cord through the dorsal column medial lemniscus pathway and directly into the somatosensory cortex. The brain is gently forced to process the physical reality of the soil in real time. This is the core mechanism of what science calls horticultural therapy. It uses agricultural tasks as a carefully calibrated medical intervention to fundamentally reset psychophysiological parameters. The brain is no longer idling in a sensory vacuum. It is actively computing a complex, organic environment. And the sensory engagement goes even deeper than touch. What if simply breathing near wet dirt physically changes your brain chemistry? The olfactory bulb is the only sensory system with a direct anatomical line to the limbic system, which controls human emotion and memory. It bypasses the thalamus entirely, offering a direct pathway to your emotional center. When you water a garden, the damp earth releases a naturally occurring chemical compound called geosmin. Your nose detects this compound instantly, even in incredibly tiny concentrations. As the molecules bind to your olfactory receptors, they generate action potentials that travel straight into the emotional processing centers of the brain. This single chemical signature acts as a powerful biological signal that noticeably downregulates the sympathetic nervous system. The brain stops scanning the sterile urban environment for abstract worries because it is suddenly bathed in concrete, reassuring biological data. The nervous system shifts rapidly from a defensive posture to an interactive, restorative rhythm. Think about the complex skeletal architecture of your body when you bend down to pull a stubborn weed from the ground. Your quadriceps fire to safely lower your mass. Your lower back activates to stabilize the delicate vertebrae of the spine. Your grip tightens around the stem, and your center of gravity drastically shifts as you apply upward force. Muscle fibers consume adenosine triphosphate to power these specific mechanical actions. On a metabolic scan, your muscle tissues would be glowing, actively pumping oxygenated blood throughout the entire vascular system. You are not standing still. You are constantly bending, squatting, pulling, lifting, and twisting. What actually happens to your total energy expenditure when your body is forced to continuously adapt to the uneven terrain of a garden bed? This specific physical demand pushes your biology gently past the threshold of a sedentary state. It imposes a constant, highly variable mechanical loading on your joints and muscle tissues. Heart rate elevates, but it does so in a beautifully controlled, natural manner. Blood vessels dilate to deliver essential nutrients and oxygen to the working muscle fibers. This physiological reality is fundamentally different from running on a motorized treadmill in an indoor gym. We explore this contrast to understand environmental biomechanics, not to diminish the profound value of indoor exercise. A treadmill forces your body into a single, highly predictable plane of motion. The biomechanical load rarely changes. The cerebellum, the part of the brain that coordinates smooth movement, essentially coasts. It relies almost entirely on stored, automated motor patterns. Gardening beautifully shatters that automated pattern. How can the simple act of digging in the dirt offer unique metabolic benefits compared to repetitive indoor cardio? Gardening demands continuous, unpredictable mechanical adaptation from your entire musculoskeletal system. You reach forward for a weed. Your brain quickly calculates the required distance. The soil gives way unexpectedly beneath your hand. The cerebellum must instantly recalculate your entire center of gravity to prevent a fall. It fires your core stabilizers. It gently adjusts the angle of your ankle. It recruits the gluteus medius muscle to maintain your pelvic balance. It is a continuous, fascinating neurological calculation. Every single micro-movement forces the nervous system to actively compute spatial data under novel physical constraints. The neurological autopilot is turned completely off. The brain and the body are forced to work closely together in real time. You must constantly adjust your physical balance, modulate your fine grip strength, and change your postural alignment with every single action you take. This constant variation recruits deep stabilizing muscles that a highly standardized indoor environment often leaves completely underutilized. Medical meta-analyses systematically confirm the profound power of this mechanism. This specific form of green exercise significantly increases baseline physical activity levels. It directly combusts stored calories through what scientists call non-exercise activity thermogenesis. We often severely underestimate the metabolic power of low-intensity, continuous movement. When you spend 45 minutes carefully weeding a garden bed, your muscles are engaging in hundreds of micro-contractions. These contractions do not deplete your glycogen stores rapidly like a heavy sprint would. Instead, they encourage your muscle cells to steadily absorb glucose from your bloodstream to sustain the slow, methodical work. How does this protect you from conditions like diabetes? It prevents dramatic spikes and crashes in your blood sugar. The muscle fibers act as a highly efficient sponge for excess glucose. Over the course of 30 days, this steady, continuous absorption fundamentally improves your insulin sensitivity. The clinical data shows a noticeable reduction in body mass index for individuals who engage in regular gardening. It is a highly efficient metabolic burn that happens almost without you realizing it. Let us explore what happens in the visual cortex when you look at a plant. The modern urban environment is built on sharp, straight lines and highly predictable geometry. Your brain processes these harsh angles constantly. But nature is built on fractals. A fern leaf is a geometric fractal. The branching of a tree root is a fractal. Research points toward the fact that the human visual cortex is uniquely evolved to process fractal patterns with almost zero metabolic effort. Why does looking at a complex plant actually rest your brain? Because processing natural fractals induces alpha wave activity in the brain, which is the neurological signature of a relaxed yet quietly alert state. The sheer act of looking at your garden visually lowers the computational load on your processing centers. Now, visualize a functional magnetic resonance imaging scan of a human brain caught in a relentless cycle of everyday urban stress. The default mode network, the neurological region heavily responsible for processing complex, abstract thoughts, self-reflection, and future worries, is highly active. It glows bright red on the monitor. This is the specific region where psychological rumination lives. It is a highly energy-intensive state that slowly drains your cognitive reserves. Now, watch that very same brain as the person carefully prunes a delicate rose bush. Slowly, that high-energy rumination cools down as the brain naturally shifts its blood flow and resources to the task-positive network. When you attempt to plant a fragile seedling, your visual cortex must accurately measure spatial depth. Your motor cortex must carefully calibrate the specific grip force required to hold the plant without crushing it. Your spatial integration networks must calculate the specific angle of the delicate stem. Why does forcing the nervous system to process these highly specific tactile and visual inputs instantly quiet the racing thoughts in your mind? In a modern environment, your brain often processes invisible, entirely abstract pressures, professional deadlines, complex financial schedules, and endless digital notifications create a state of chronic cognitive load. Gardening beautifully invites the brain to execute a fascinating neurological process. This is cognitive redirection in pure action. You simply cannot execute the fine motor control required to successfully graft a small branch while simultaneously dwelling on tomorrow's stressful meeting. The prefrontal cortex has strict physiological limits. It cannot easily process a highly complex tactile motor task and a complex emotional worry at the very same time. The cognitive bandwidth of the human brain is essentially zero-sum. You have to spend that energy on one thing or the other. As you focus heavily on detangling the delicate roots of a plant, the brain eagerly allocates available blood glucose and oxygen to the motor cortex and the visual cortex to successfully complete the manual task. By redirecting this vital metabolic energy, it temporarily removes fuel from the amygdala and the default mode network. Fear and anxiety heavily require metabolic fuel to manifest. When the fuel is physically redirected to your hands and your eyes, the rumination physically cannot continue. This is a basic energy constraint of your biology. What if your nervous system is biologically wired to automatically pause a stress response when it is busy keeping another biological organism alive? The intense sensory demands of the soil gently override the neural circuits that normally feed depressive thoughts. The central nervous system naturally cools down anxiety signals because the immediate physical task requires your undivided presence. Meta-analytical data extracted from dozens of independent clinical studies reveals a significantly quantifiable reduction in everyday stress, frustration, and mental fatigue. The biological system helps heal itself simply by actively shifting its point of focal attention. By deliberately redirecting limited cognitive resources away from abstract worries and toward concrete physical action, gardening actively engages and soothes the emotional processing centers of the brain. The highly repetitive nature of the task creates a state of active, mechanical meditation. It invites the prefrontal cortex to completely abandon its exhaustive simulation of future events. The brain is firmly anchored to the present moment by the undeniable physics of the dirt. It is a profound physiological grounding mechanism that modern medicine is only just beginning to fully appreciate. Imagine a vast, complex grid of medical statistics floating in the air directly in front of you. Thousands of individual data points from dozens of different clinical trials begin to systematically converge. They link together to form the glowing, energetic silhouette of a highly optimized human body. If this dirt-based intervention is truly this effective at altering our physiology, does the large-scale clinical data actually confirm it? A comprehensive umbrella review encompassing over 40 independent scientific studies has generated a clear, undeniable statistical conclusion. Gardening produces a measured effect size of 0.55 for the improvement of overall well-being. How does a statistical effect size of 0.55 actually translate into the physical, microscopic reality of your immune system? In the rigorous realm of medical statistics, this specific number is structurally magnificent. It means the intervention is not just a passing feeling, it is a systemic, whole body biological upgrade. We often assume that psychological well-being is entirely isolated to our subjective mood. This seems logical to our modern understanding of health. But the biological reality is that your mood has a direct, quantifiable, and highly mechanical link to the optimization of your cellular immune function. The fascinating science of psychoneuroimmunology explains the specific mechanism behind this connection. When your chronic stress drops, the sympathetic nervous system slowly disengages. The parasympathetic nervous system gracefully takes the lead, gently shifting your body into a crucial state of rest and digest. The production of cortisol and adrenaline drops proportionally alongside it. When cortisol is noticeably minimized in the bloodstream, your white blood cells, specifically your natural killer cells, are finally released from chemical suppression. They become significantly more efficient in patrolling your bloodstream for foreign pathogens and irregular cells. Let us examine how these natural killer cells actually operate once they are freed from cortisol suppression. They do not just passively float around. They are highly active hunters. When a natural killer cell identifies a stressed or irregular cell in your body, it binds to it. It then releases tiny biological weapons called perforins. These perforins naturally punch microscopic holes in the membrane of the target cell. Once the membrane is breached, the natural killer cell injects granzymes, which are specialized proteins that instruct the irregular cell to safely dismantle itself. Why is this microscopic battle relevant to a garden? Because the parasympathetic state, induced by touching soil, creates the ideal biochemical environment where this immune function operates at peak efficiency. The garden is quietly arming your internal cellular defenses simply by lowering your stress hormones. The physical joy you experience when a tomato plant finally bears fruit after weeks of care is not just a fleeting emotion. It is a highly potent biochemical signal traveling through your body. It tells your bone marrow to continue aggressively producing healthy, resilient immune cells. It tells your autonomic nervous system to completely prioritize cellular repair over the exhausting metabolic demands of fight-or-flight survival. Systemic inflammation markers in your blood, such as C-reactive protein, begin to stabilize and drop noticeably. Lower C-reactive protein levels correlate strongly with greatly improved cardiovascular health and significantly reduced tissue damage. The soil literally becomes a beautiful catalyst for a total physiological recalibration. This systemic upgrade extends far beyond the confines of the brain. It cascades warmly through the endocrine and immune systems, ultimately creating a robust biological environment that actively supports long-term health. Evidence points toward well-being being a hard, measurable state of physiological resilience driven by direct interaction with our environment. Now, visualize a tiny balcony on the 15th floor of a heavily concrete apartment building. A few small ceramic pots sit quietly in the corner, holding a small handful of green plants. Then, shift your vision to a small, shared allotment garden tightly wedged between two massive commercial skyscrapers. You might naturally assume that to harvest these profound medical benefits, you need daily access to a sprawling, rural, agricultural farm. The clinical data suggests the exact opposite. How much physical space does your biology actually require to successfully initiate this complex, system-wide healing cascade? The scientific consensus reveals that a small domestic garden or a tiny plot in a community space is entirely sufficient. The crucial variable here is not the total square footage of the dirt you happen to own. The variable that actually matters is the strict consistency of your physical interaction with whatever small amount of dirt you have access to. Can a mere handful of soil in a cramped urban apartment truly help regulate your incredibly sophisticated nervous system? Yes, because the sensory input processed by the brain remains highly consistent. The microscopic mechanoreceptors in your fingers do not know how large the garden is. They only know they are making direct, meaningful physical contact with the earth. The visual cortex does not require a vast, endless forest to successfully trigger a parasympathetic response. It only requires the specific green wavelength and the geometric fractal shape of a single, healthy leaf to begin down, regulating the sympathetic nervous system. The olfactory bulb only needs a microscopic trace of geosmin to powerfully signal profound safety to the amygdala. This is the fascinating, uncompromising efficiency of human biology. We are highly responsive to even microdoses of natural stimuli. It is a brilliantly elegant evolutionary design that constantly works in our favor. The spatial constraint that so many city dwellers worry about is largely an illusion. The biological reality is that any meaningful physical contact with soil initiates the vital sensory cascade. The nervous system simply does not measure acreage. It measures sensory input. The mechanoreceptors fire in your hands. The visual cortex processes the natural geometry. The olfactory bulb detects the soil chemistry. And immediately, the physiological reset begins. Maintaining a regular dose of this horticultural therapy is no longer just an optional pastime for the weekend. Research points toward it being one of the most highly feasible, scientifically sound public health strategies available to us today. It is a brilliant, remarkably low-cost approach to counteract the deep physiological fatigue caused by our modern indoor environments. Your body reacts with beautiful, mechanical precision to the specific physical and biological signals you deliberately choose to feed it. What happens to a society that forgets how to touch the earth? We see the results in our clinics and hospitals every single day. The subtle degradation of our baseline health is often a direct result of the extinction of experience. But the beauty of the human body is its remarkable neuroplasticity and physiological adaptability. It is always waiting for the right signal to heal. A 30-day commitment to tending a small plot of soil is not a magical cure-all, but rather a profoundly logical return to the environmental parameters our bodies were originally engineered for. We are not separate from the ecosystems we evolved in. Our immune systems, our metabolic pathways, and our cognitive networks are all deeply intertwined with the natural world. When we step outside and put our hands in the dirt, we are quite literally plugging our nervous system back into its original power source. The biological feedback loop is instantly restored. If you are currently feeling the heavy cognitive fatigue of urban stress, the biological solution might just be waiting for you out in the dirt. You do not need to overhaul your entire life. You simply need to start planting a single seed today. Let your mechanoreceptors fire. Let your default mode network rest. Let your natural killer cells patrol your body without the heavy burden of cortisol holding them back. It is a remarkable biological partnership that has existed for millions of years. If you found this insight valuable and want to keep exploring the fascinating biological mechanisms that quietly govern your health and your mind, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. We will see you in the next medical deep dive. This content is strictly for entertainment and educational purposes only and does not replace professional medical advice from your doctor.